If you've been watching all of our 244 GTK episodes at this point, it probably looks like we know what we're doing. We try to package these episodes, make them nice and digestible, give you kind of a payoff at the end of them. Oh, cool, we got a job done. Well, this one is not going to fit that mold. This is a much more realistic look into how the shop actually functions because for once this week, I have no idea what we're going to get done or in some ways where we're even going. Situation report, we've got a K20 in this car now instead of a K24. And for those of you that know, that moves the cylinder head down 3/4 of an inch, but I forgot that means everything connected to the head also moves down 3/4 of an inch, which means the intake manifold moves, the charge piping moves, the pipe connecting our turbo, which we just replaced, moves. The exhaust pipes, they move. Nothing lines up anymore. Nothing just fits. And I kind of expected some of this, but not all of it. I've got some hurdles that I've got to clear, and I got to get them done really quickly because as of this episode dropping this morning for you guys, we've got 3 weeks to the day to get this thing done, running, dyno tuned, and out to the track and get it tested because 4 weeks from today is Grid Life Laguna Seca, and I'm not going to miss that. I want to go. I want to have fun. I've never driven that track. It's going to be a dream come true, and I've missed everything else that I've wanted to do with this car this year. But with that, I have no idea exactly what we're going to get done this week versus what's going to be next week. We're just going to give you a view into the shop. We're going to get done what we can. We're going to package this episode up, give it to you guys, and we're going to keep the pedal down because next week we've got to keep making progress if we want this thing to get done. So let's see where we get. We've got a lot of cutting and welding to do, and I've got some problems to solve and some headaches to work through. Let's do it. Now, in case you missed it, in the last episode, we dropped our 4-piston racing K20 into the Ferrari for the first time, and with it, we installed all of our engine accessories. The most radical change to accompany the engine is, of course, our upgrade to our TurboSmart TS2 turbocharger. We made sure that it actually fits in the car in the last episode, but this time, we've got to hook it up and make it work. Pretty much everything that connects to the turbo has to be redone from scratch. Now, it's a given that we'll have to redo the exhaust because the turbo is different and in a different place, but it was my hope that the wastegate dump tube would still work. Yes, it has moved down 19 millimeters with the cylinder head, but it's got a couple of degrees of freedom thanks to the fact that it's bolted on by 2 different V-bands, one for the tube itself and one where we can clock the wastegate. But unfortunately, despite my best efforts, it still did not line up the way that it used to and was going to need some reconstruction. But before we go cutting up a perfectly good exhaust pipe that might just need a mount redesigned, let's work on the exhaust coming out of the turbo itself. The old exhaust can't even be cut up and modified to work on this one. All of the bends are just kind of the wrong shape and put everything in the wrong place, so we're back to square one. Both 321 stainless and titanium seem a bit like overkill for a small exhaust like this, so we're going to stick with 316 stainless, and in this case, it's going to be 3-inch tubing that we've got to transition up to 3.5 for the exhaust tip itself. For exhaust routing, all we really have to do is come directly out of the turbo, turn 90 degrees to clear the chassis, and point it out the back of the car. On paper, that should be really simple, but of course, I'm going to make this a little bit more difficult by being a total nut job about the angle of all of the tubing and making it look exactly the way that I want. So buckle in because you guys are coming along for the ride. We're going to be making a lot of trips to and from the back of the car and the workbench to get this job done the right way. With the first bend in place and tacked to the flange, now we need to transition up to that bigger tubing size, from 3 to 3.5, and to do that, we're going to need a stainless steel transition, and to get this job done correctly, I'm going to enlist the help of our friend Les over at Nimmo Machine. But before we do that, I want to stop and tell you guys about today's sponsor, which is Carly. This is Carly's OBD2 scanner. It's one of my favorite tools that I have in the toolbox for multiple reasons because not only does it allow me to read codes, it helps me diagnose problems and at times even tells me how to fix them. Let me show you how it works. This is Khalil's daily driver E36, and he recently finished up a manual swap, having bought it for cheap since it was an auto. But it's got a pesky check engine light, so in comes Carly. We plug into the OBD2 port, boot up the app, and within just a moment, we're connected to the car and we're able to scan all of its systems. One of my favorite features of the Carly app is its ability to live stream data directly from your ECU. It can read out things like engine speed, coolant temperature, oil temperature, or anything else that your ECU is capable of spitting out to the app. And not only that, The Smart Mechanic feature offers expert-written guides that help you identify, diagnose, and repair the problems that your car is reporting. In our case, Khalil just forgot to plug in a sensor, but this is a must-have for any weekend warrior. And of course, once we have our issues fixed, all we've got to do is clear our codes. The app can handle all of it. If you want a Carly OBD2 scanner for your car, you can hit the link in my description and get 15% off with code StanceWorks. You're gonna want one. I love mine. Get to it. And thanks again to Carly for sponsoring this episode. Now back to the fabrication. Normally, when we come across the street to the machine shop, we're here to see Brett. But this time, we're in for a treat because Les Nimmo of Nimmo Machine is going to help us this time around. I was blessed to meet Les nearly a decade ago when I brought a unique problem of needing a 1mm thick sleeve to install bearings on the wrong spindle. It was a weird project, but he accomplished it no problem, and ever since, he's knocked out any project I've brought to him, big or small. This time, he might have laughed at me a little bit because all I really needed was a section cut out of the middle of our stainless steel cone. And yeah, we could do this at our shop with an angle grinder, but I think we might make a mess of it. And this adapter is going to be tiny once it's done. I don't have a great way to hold it, and ultimately, I want all of the tubes to be square with each other, and the right tool for this job, I think, is a lathe and a Les. Or, in truth, I'm just looking for excuses to go see Les and Brett because they're always fun to spend time with, and I always walk away having learned something. Our trip to Nimmo Machine was short. We were in and out in maybe 10 minutes. He did a beautiful job of cutting down our adapter to the required size, and saved me the risk of messing up the only one I've got on hand if we want to get this done today. Back at our shop, you can finally see what this adapter is going to do and how well it fits. Now we just have to decide where we want to put this adapter in line on our exhaust pipe. Of course, we could fit it right where it's shown now, but I think it'd look a little bit more polished closer to the turbo itself. While we're at it, I've also got to decide how long I want the exhaust pipe itself to be. How far should it stick out of the back of the car? I want to get it to sit a little bit further out than our old system just to save the back end in case we've got a fire, but otherwise I liked the way that it looked and I want to replicate what was here previously. So, next step, once again, pull it all apart and start cutting things up and tacking things together till they fit roughly where we want them. I decided to place the transition more or less right after our exhaust pipe straightens out, just a couple of inches after the curve itself. The tape offers a ballpark estimate on where I want the exhaust pipe length to end so that I know where to cut this thing. The question at hand at the moment, though, is how lucky are we going to get? Can we really take a straight piece of tube, attach it to our transition, and have it land right where we want to? Well, in a sense, yes. We could do this, and it would work, as you will see here in a moment. Tacked together, it does point accurately out of the back of the car, but it's not without its tiny issues that I'm gonna nitpick and want to fix. Now, there are two things that I'm not sold on. One is that the upward angle of the exhaust pipe coming out of the back of the car is just slightly too steep for me. Only a couple of degrees, but I'm not sold on how it sits, and I'd like it to sit slightly more level. Again, only a touch. But on top of that, I also cut a cardboard template so I could check and confirm the angle of each pipe as it sweeps outward towards the edge of the car. The exhaust pipes are not straight out of the back, they each angle ever so slightly, and I want them to be the same. Of course, I could just match the exhaust we're building to the wastegate dump pipe that's already on the car, and we could simply just modify its mount, but that's not quite going to cut it either. because the angle of the wastegate dump pipe is also more swept than it was before because we lowered the engine and had to rotate it upwards to fit out of the back of the car. Now, I know I'm nitpicking the details here, but again, when I've got this much time into the car, I want to make it perfect. So here we go. All right, so I think against my better judgment here, I'm going to cut up the wastegate pipe because although I really wanted to leave everything intact so that if I ever wanted to go back to a big turbo, everything could just bolt back on. This technically will still bolt on. It's just the exhaust won't line up quite the way that I want it to. Seems like kind of a non-issue, but I want to cut this because I'm being a bit of a perfectionist right now. The gap from the outside of the exhaust to the chassis on each side it's like a 1/4 inch difference. And it totally doesn't matter, nobody would ever notice, but it's gonna drive me crazy every time I work on the car. So, because I've got to lengthen this anyway so that it protrudes properly from the back of the car, I figure let's just cut it here, replace this whole segment. I can pull a little bit out of this here, so it'll give me the gap that I want, so each side is symmetric, and then we can just kind of cut the bed here and add some straight. It should give us everything we need. It'll make the changes that I need so that this fits the way that I want, so that it fits out of the back of the car the way I want, etc. This should work. I'm just kind of bummed to cut up a good piece, but here we go. Now, in an ideal world, this will basically just go right back on and look exactly like it did before, but just have a tiny bit more clearance. If I am good at all, and not yet. Not yet. But after a few other subtle changes and getting the tube to sit the way that I want it to, we're back to the other side of the car. I know I'm nitpicking and really looking at the details here, but the turbo wastegate dump pipe sits the way that I want it to, from the angle it protrudes from the back of the car to its proximity to the chassis. All that's really left to mess with on it is its overall length. And now I want to make the turbo's exhaust pipe match it. That means pulling it off the car, modifying it, and refitting it to see if indeed the changes that we've made make it match. I'm splitting hairs here, and I'm looking for 1/10 of a degree or 1/16 of an inch, but look, I want it to be right, so we're going to take the time to do that. But I can also admit you guys probably don't want to see every single iteration that I've done to this exhaust, because the reality is this is just lap after lap from the back of the car to the bandsaw to the belt sander and back to the welding bench over and over and over again until we get this to be the way that I want it to. So let's just kind of fast forward here. We'll remove the parts, we'll cut them apart, we'll sand them down, we'll reinstall them, we'll make sure that they're doing exactly what we want to, we'll make some necessary changes and take some measurements, pull it back apart, we'll weld it, you get it. Rinse and repeat, that is the process of making exhausts. The final detail, of course, is just getting the two exhaust tips cut to the same length, and honestly, that might be the most challenging part of it all. Cutting the tip of a tube square is no easy task to do by hand, so I 3D printed a template to make it a little bit easier, and, well, it's close, but you'll see what I mean here in a moment. It's not perfect, so we're gonna have to adjust it again. Surprise, surprise. I know, but I'll spare you. Okay, so I think at this point, I'm at a stopping point until I'm ready to finish weld these exhaust pipes. All of my angles and the way they sit in the engine bay, if we talk about how they're positioned in kind of the rear cutout of the body here, everything looks really good. The only thing that I really need to adjust is I need to kind of angle this cut ever so slightly to match this one. This one's perfectly straight, and this one's maybe just like a degree off, and that's gonna drive me crazy. But otherwise, exhaust is done, just needs to get finish welded. Obviously, we're still missing one charge pipe that goes here. The old one will not work because the turbo is a different size. We've got to kind of adapt from here up to the correct size with this guy. Pretty tight bend. I had some parts and pieces on hand in order to build this stuff, but unfortunately it just doesn't work with the angles, and so we just have to kind of unfortunately wait as I've ordered new aluminum with different bends and different radiuses in order to get this tube built. It sucks, but that's kind of the reality of fabricating this stuff. Sometimes you just don't have the parts that you need on hand, so it's just a holding pattern. Otherwise, all we really have left once this stuff is done and finish welded is, I think, just plumbing. I guess the final hurdle at the moment is we didn't have an episode last week because I got COVID, and that in and of itself sucked, but I'm just dealing with kind of the after effects of it. I have no energy. I don't want to be working on a car at all right now, but if I don't, then we're not going to get done, and I don't get to race this car at kind of the last event that I really want to do this year. We've missed every other one, and that's a heartbreaker. Not willing to miss this one, so we got to get to work. So hopefully the FedEx guy shows up with this aluminum tubing we need to get this project done, all of the hard lining done. That's the engine back in. Everything is really kind of mounted up, getting close to the finish line on this thing. So fingers crossed. So while we wait on the FedEx man to show up with the aluminum we need, it's a good time to do that finish welding. We'll wrap everything in foil, pump it full of argon, and settle in for a couple of hours of welding. So I'm pausing because every once in a while I get kind of stumped. I'm not perfect. I'm pretty confident and competent at this point with TIG welding, and I love welding stainless. It's so kind of like soothing to do. I've been looking forward to this stuff all day. First weld went just fine, and I'm always changing my settings and kind of dialing it in. I haven't welded this kind of stuff in a few months, so yeah, always brushing up. But as said, sometimes I get stumped. Weld 1 went great. Weld 2 was going fine. And then we get, of course, right to the top of the part, the most visible part of the entire thing, and the weld just goes south. It's totally gray. It's completely cooked. It was kind of like sputtering and sparking while I was welding it. I know I've got good gas coverage. I've got the big lens on. I can feel the gas against my cheek. We've got argon inside the part. Maybe I just didn't get it clean enough on the inside. Maybe some sort of contamination, but I have no idea why it did it, but I'm bummed because it made the part pretty gross right where you're going to see it. It's this nasty weld. I'm not going to cut it apart and redo it. I don't have another cone. I don't have another one of these bends. I'd start running out of parts and pieces, and this just needs to get done. We can always redo it later if we want to make it look like a show car. This needs to get out on track, but that sucks. That bums me out big time. Hopefully the rest goes better. And thankfully it did. The rest of the welding went without a hitch, and I'm happy with how it all came out. It seems like it's always a number of months between times when I weld parts like this, and so of course it's always those last few welds where I finally find my groove and it starts to click, and then it's all done. That just means I need more fab projects here in the shop, which is a good thing. We've got the big one on the horizon. It's going to be worthwhile. With the exhausts welded up, it's time to turn our attention to that charge pipe we need to make. Even though we don't have all of the pieces on hand, we can't let that slow us down. So we're going to pull the compressor side of the turbo and take it over to the workbench to take on the next step. All right, so first order of business that we need to do on this turbo housing is we've got to get the air from the turbo into the intercooler. To do that, we're going to put a Vibrant HD clamp in line. I've shown you guys these a bunch of times here on the channel and have all sorts of kind of explanations, so I'll save you guys this time. I'll link to a different video if you want to know more about them, but the short version is this. It is basically a hard connection instead of a silicone coupler. It's got degrees of movement, it can move around, it can wiggle, but unlike a silicone coupler, I don't have to worry about this blowing up or tearing or puncturing, anything like that. This is a permanent solution, and I like these a lot, but that means we've got to weld these ferrules onto our pipes, or in this case, onto our turbo, just like that. So simple as that. We could cut this down and kind of shore it up, make it a little bit tighter, but I don't really see a point to doing that. It's wasted effort. We're just gonna weld her directly on there. They mate together pretty well, so let's clean this stuff up with acetone and burn her in. I made a very rudimentary jig by clamping the housing down to the table and a 1-2-3 block to hold the ferrule into place and at the right height, and it worked pretty well after shimming the turbine housing up just a touch. Alright, so our FedEx man showed up. We've got a couple of bends that we're going to need. These guys, it's a decent example there. Really tight 1D bends, which means that the kind of, what do we call it, centerline radius of the bend is the same as the diameter of the bend. It's basically as tight as you can go. So that's what we needed there because we're limited on space. This is actually the old one, so you can kind of see it was really close to that, but we can't just swap it out. We gotta do some figuring. We've also got to step up a size, so we're gonna be making something kind of funky. Let's go set some stuff in the back of the car and see how it fits. Maybe something kind of like that. And it needs a little bit more bend, but less than this one. But something like that. And then this will come in and step up. So I think first step, we'll take a little bit of length out of this and a little bit off of here. We'll wind up cutting this back a touch and then see if we can use just a little bit of bend to get us where we need to be. And that should work. Maybe, kind of. We'll find out. Go on and bring this back to the straight bit there and then start figuring out if I want to do a bend out of this material or a little bit more out of this one. Probably that, keep the small size. Just like the exhaust, this is a serious back and forth process of trial and error to get everything to fit correctly. The upshot though is that aluminum is a lot easier to work with. It's easier to cut, it's easier to clean up, and easier to level out the edges so the tubes fit together properly. For these pieces, I'm just going to eyeball most of it. I'll hold up the parts, draw some lines, and just go hacking away at the material until it fits the way I want. And thankfully, for your entertainment and for my timeline, this actually went pretty well. We got this whole tube knocked out in just a handful of minutes. Now, of course, in order to weld this stuff up, we've got to make some reference marks so I can attach it correctly on the workbench. I don't want to try to hold these and weld them in place, so we'll do the entire thing on the weld table and then bring it back over for installation. All right, it's in. It looks reasonably good. It's got the degree of movement that we want it to, just so that as the engine articulates, it's not going to just break the thing. And I'm reasonably happy with it. I think my welds on the actual ferrules came out decent enough. Some of these came out good. Really the downside is, of course, where it's most visible. Once again, just like our exhaust, I've got a wart out here because, as I'm sure you guys know, this starts out as a straight piece of material, and when they bend it, all the extra material has to kind of go towards the inside where it gets compressed, and then on the outside it gets really, really thin. You can actually feel the distortions in the surface of the metal. And so, of course, where it got really thin right on the outside of this bend here, I blew right through it, had to kind of patch a hole up, but whatever. You guys aren't allowed to look at it from this side, only from over there. It'll look better. Doesn't matter. It's gonna hold. We can make it look pretty later. As of now, that is crossed off the list. That is the intake system done, or charge system done. We've just got to get an air filter on the turbo. Exhaust is done. Everything's all welded up. I'm feeling reasonably good. Next on the list, of course, is plumbing, but we're gonna get there. All in all, I think that was a decent bit of progress for the week. We've got all of our exhaust pipes finished up, our charge piping is in place, both front and rear, and as a whole, I think we're really closing in on having this car running once again. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. We got some fabrication done. I think we got our exhaust stuff done, charge piping, most of the engine bay is back together. But again, this episode wasn't that nice, clean, tidy packaging that we usually strive for. When we go for that, sometimes we gotta throw an episode out. We skip a week. We don't get stuff done because we want that nice polished look. And in this case, we're really just trying to bring you up to date, real time. We've got a project car that desperately needs finishing. But I want to give you guys episodes. I don't want to just make another week go by where we don't post something. So if you liked this one, if you enjoyed this format, I know it's largely the same, but it's a little bit different. Do the things, do the comment, do the like, let us know, share it with your friends. We love the positive reinforcement so that we know we can package stuff like this and kind of change it up when we need to, especially given right here out of frame is our big new project, getting started on the chassis table. I know I'm talking about it a lot. We're gonna go live with this thing here in about a month, and those episodes are gonna be more like this. We're diving in, I already told you, a full tube chassis project. It's the biggest project I have ever undertaken, and kind of finding that structure and that rhythm is gonna take some time, and it's good to know that we can just, again, fly by the seat of our pants and just kind of figure this out as we go and take you along for the ride. So remind us what you think. Can we do stuff like this or not? Or do we have to go back to that fancy storytelling where you get that nice sweet payoff at the end? Hopefully not. Either way, I still got work to do. We gotta get this car done. I gotta get back to fabricating. I'll catch you guys in the next episode where at minimum, we're gonna have all of our plumbing done. But fingers crossed, we're also going to be at the dyno and have it tuned because we've got to get out on track ASAP. I'll catch you guys there, and I will see you at Laguna Seca. I'm going. I've got to have this car done. If I don't, crucify me or something. I don't know where we're going. Yeah, I'm going to lose it. We got to get it done.